Good morning. Thanks everyone for joining. So we wanted to start by providing some context around the Connecting People and Community for Living Well work. The work of the past 3 years has focused on building an understanding of what contributes to well-being of those living in rural communities affected by dementia. This includes those with a diagnosis as well as their carers, and as well the well-being of the multi-sector teams who seek to better support those living in their communities. What we have learned is that regardless of an individual's role, diagnosis, or place in the community, we have more in common than what separates us. Turning attention to what contributes to well-being can shift focus to what are the common needs we have, such as safety, connection, and contribution. Focusing on well-being and what contributes to it creates the opportunity to shift thinking from what their needs are and how do we help address them to what we all need and how we can work together to support living well. Just like the teams who participated in this work, we ask that you come to this next 90 minutes together with 3 things in mind: a curious mind, a desire to make a difference, and embracing the notion that we can do more together than we can do as individuals. So we'll get started with the model that's been created for this. So our model has 5 components, and it can be applied at both the provincial level and the community level. The key points to pull out today for you are the provincial support, and this really goes beyond the grant team that's been supporting this work up until now, and it's reflective of the broader system, province-wide organizations, and provincial entities, and the instrumental role that they play in supporting the sustainability of this type of work. And many of those are represented on the line today. Communities, the local knowledge is deep and rich, and those at the local level can be fully trusted to know what is best for their community. The principles, they provide a North Star for both the local work and at that provincial level. The Wellbeing Guide, which has been developed over the course of this grant with much input and feedback from the teams participating. Thank you so much. And serves as a way for them to measure and monitor the impact of what their actions have been. And then lastly, the competency framework, also developed over the course of this grant, outlining skills and knowledge needed to work collaboratively. And within the center of it is that supporting individual and collective well-being at the community level. So how was this model implemented in this grant? We created one model with enough structure to provide guidance and enough flexibility to be context adapted. We worked with 5 communities to implement it locally. And in the next slides, you will hear how the communities participating took 5 different approaches. I'll hand it over to Helen, who will share a little bit more about the incredible work these communities have achieved.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, so we'll start with Drumheller. A large focus in this community was finding ways to connect with those who don't typically participate, but could benefit from the connection and support offered through local programs. The programs and supports implemented served as stepping stones where people could attend, make connections with the facilitator and others who were attending, and feel welcome and safe there. This meant that some who were first-time participants in any activity became attendees at other activities as well, expanding their connections. A beautiful example of a successful support in Drumheller is the Circle of Connection Community Day program. Not only was this valuable for the individuals with dementia, but it meant carers of those attending received much needed 2 hours of respite every week. In the Westlock community, they were led by a core group of passionate and dedicated individuals, and they formed the Building Compassionate Communities Working Group. This group embraces seeking input from those with lived experience. They take time at the start of each meeting to check in with each other and listen to each other's stories. One of the leads in the Westlock team is the youth program coordinator, who brings fresh eyes and an intergenerational perspective to the work. The assembly of their dementia sensory kits provides a great example of this, where local youth were engaged and a mother-daughter combo, featured in our photo, worked to develop the twiddle muffs used in the sensory kits. The Three Hills and Nehill County team has had incredible success in growing their multi-sector team. At the beginning of the grant, there were only 2 members in the coalition. A rebrand of the group to Nehill Dementia Friendly Communities in January 2022 led to an expansion in membership, and there are now 16 members who actively contribute. This expansion has also resulted in an increase in volunteers who are providing activities throughout the local communities. Recognizing that stigma around dementia can happen in communities, activities pursued in the Nehill County area were inclusive of all seniors. Innisfail has formalized their collaborative by forming the Community Partners in Action Nonprofit Society. This has provided the opportunity for them to create a brand for their work and accept donations to support programming. They have also had great success in developing virtual programming through Let's Connect. Approximately 250 older adults join their virtual programs on a weekly basis. As well, they are pursuing a new approach through pop-up activities. These provide people the chance to try out an activity for 3 to 4 weeks to see if they're interested in participating or volunteering. And in Stony Plain, there's been a beautiful success in the active participation of 2 caregivers on their collaborative. The environment created in the Dementia Collaborative is safe and welcoming, creating the opportunity for input and rich learning from the caregivers. This safe and welcoming space is also threaded through all of their activities. The team has also found a way to take what was learned through discussions stemming from the Wellbeing Guide and the concept of well-being, and being able to apply those learnings to other community priorities. Their belief is that having well-being as a focus helps shape the conversations and bring members across key sectors to a common focus. I'll hand this back to Sharon now to talk a bit about our evaluation.
Thanks, Ellen. Sorry, we're looking at the mute button here. So evaluating projects and work that takes place in complex and dynamic settings requires an evaluation approach that goes beyond traditional evaluation methods. On the screen are examples of what we are calling the project's suite of evaluation, developed to demonstrate impact of this work. We won't go through the list, but do want to flag that within the AHS context, there have been a couple of firsts in this work. One is the principle-based evaluation that is being completed by our colleagues from the Alberta Health Service Health System Knowledge and Evaluation team. And second is the social return on investment. We're just in the process of finalizing a forecast SROI that is being completed with by Constellation Consulting. A full evaluation package for the project will be ready by the end of April, and we're happy to share that information with anyone who's interested. If you are interested, please do reach out to our team and we'll be happy to share. So now we want to welcome our keynote speaker, Cormac, and Richard Lewanchuk will do the introduction of Cormac. And so Richard, over to you.
Thanks. Sorry, I was making doing charades here because it said the host has to unmute you, so I couldn't unmute myself. Anyway, that's today's entertainment. I hope you all got that. Somebody did. It's a great honor and privilege to introduce Cormac Russell to you today. Most introductions typically go through he graduated from Princeton at age 12 and then went on to get an advanced degree in astrophysics and neurosurgery, but I'm not going to do that. I first heard Cormac speak probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I was totally blown away. I thought that what he had to say was so disruptive to our concepts of healthcare, but yet made so much sense. And if you read his article that's titled, "We Don't Have a Health Problem, We Have a Village Problem," you'll understand what I mean. I've had the opportunity to speak with Cormac on a number of occasions since then, and I've really learned so much. And Cormac's approach to enlightening uninformed people like me has been really low key and encouraging and positive. And after you talk to him, you come away realizing how little you knew, but feeling very energized and optimistic. On vacation recently, I read Cormac's book, Rekindling Democracy. I had been given it a while back, and I was sort of saving it like a fine bottle of wine to savor when I had time. And so I savored each page, and I'm not one for using yellow markers when I read a book, but I was really wishing that I had one with me. The only problem is that I would have highlighted every single sentence of that book. Sometimes, we talk about ending poverty and creating world peace and ending global warming. And Cormac's someone who can teach us how to do all of that. And I'm really serious. If we start at the grassroots with neighbors, neighborhood, community, and work our way up to towns and cities and provinces and countries, we can probably get there. In Canada, it's been said that recent Ipsos poll said that the third priority of Canadians is to have further investments in the healthcare system. And I'm not sure I agree in the way people are thinking. Spending more money doing the same thing, we all know where that ends up. I think Cormac would teach us that using the assets of people and neighbors and neighborhoods and communities and using the currency of relationships will get us a lot farther than another $1 billion in the healthcare system. I think he'd probably tell us that we need to focus on the care part of healthcare. So I'll end here, but it's a great pleasure to introduce Cormac Russell to you. He is the Managing Director of Nurture Development and a member of the faculty of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at DePaul University in Chicago. We're really fortunate to have him with us here today, and I know you'll find what he has to say both inspiring and motivating. So, Cormac, over to you.
Richard, thank you so much. That's incredibly generous, and I'm humbled by your words. It's a real privilege to be with you all. I feel a guest, even though we all see each other's effigies and we're connecting across the World Wide Web. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, we can imagine that we're connected in a much more intimate and proximate way. Instead of thinking about the World Wide Web, we'll pretend we're in the Wood Wide Web, and we're all, in a sense, in a forest, trying to grow some ideas that honor all of the great stories and the work that Sharon and Helen and others have been sharing with us these last few minutes. And I really start with that because I think it's so important. And perhaps as I get into my slides, I can speak a little bit more about why I think it's important, but a little bit around how we might be in conversation together today, because I think conversation is the key thing. So I thought what I'd do over the next while is, rather than spend too long speaking, I'd take maybe 2 15-minute chunks. And at the end of each 15-minute chunk, what I'd love to do is let's get in small groups, maybe groups of 3 or so. Let's have a conversation where you get the opportunity to meet strangers, soon to be friends, and have a conversation about what really struck you. So that's important. Then we'll come back together and see what's resonating and go from there. So it's a little bit different than perhaps a keynote in the classic sense. And I think that's important, because I don't want to be the sage on the stage. I'm here as a cheerleader and here as a conversation partner. And I genuinely believe that in terms of your lived experience, you know at least as much as I do. And of course that would be right, because what we're talking about today, as Richard said, is something we all know in common. It's our commonwealth. And it's the idea of community as a verb, not a noun, as something we do. So as I speak over the next few minutes, what I really want to do is to narrow the idea that change happens by going at things, challenges, problems in a mile wide, inch deep kind of way, and argue that in fact we need to turn that narrative on its head and think much more about making change happen at an inch wide, mile deep level. all of the stories we've heard, even just in the last few minutes, are stories about being true to relationships and true to place, starting local and getting in touch with what matters to people in their lived experiences. It's the everydayness of the stories that matter. And we'll talk about how you can go from there to proliferate that. But let me call up my slides first. So what I'm hoping we'll be able to do over the next few minutes is share with you a little bit of a report from the field. So I've had the privilege over the last 27 years or so of working in 39 countries around the world. And I thought it would be fun today for my little inputs to share with you what they're teaching me and others. So rather than this be my keynote, I'm going to attribute this to the thousands and thousands of people whose wisdom I have learned at the feet of. So this is a story from multiple learning sites around the world. And what I'm going to try to do is to illustrate what I think are some common learnings. And I do that because I think they resonate with much of the stories that we're celebrating today across the process that we've just been hearing. So it is my nature to always call attention to power in our conversations. I think that's really, really important, particularly given my privilege as a white middle-class male. I own that as best as I can. And I also own the limits of my narrative in that regard. But what I want to do is just make a point, and it's really, I think, a celebration point, that we live in a world where there's a huge amount of focus on trying to get various institutions to better service. You know, so the story is the only way my life's going to get better is if some institution or professional comes in to make it better. It's kind of like a hydraulic relationship, right? Where on the triangle side, which represents the institution, the more I can get the institutions doing things to me and for me, the better my life will be. How's that working out for you? Not so good. So I think even a moment's looking around suggests that if we outsource health and well-being to the monopoly of well-intended professionals, we'll do two things. One, we'll ensure we're dissatisfied. Two, we'll burn out the professionals. So what I want to call some attention to in this first sharing is just this idea that there are two different tools for change in the world. One is absolutely institutions. We need our institutions. They're hugely important. Their expertise, their machinery, their technology, the goodwill of the people who work in them are vital, but they're an operating system that's profoundly different to community. And so the picture you have here is another operating system that I call associational life. It's the everyday clubs and groups and associational networks that are really, really vital to our well-being, to our joy, to our laughter, and also to how we endure pain. Because we're humans. That means to be human is to go through a terminal condition. We all die. Ain't nobody getting off this planet alive, okay? That means we have to learn how to do suffering. Communities exist because we suffer. There's no institution that does suffering better than a connected community. So my point in this presentation, and I guess in the second one, will be that we need both tools to be working in right relationship with each other. And I think that that's what we're celebrating today. An endeavor on the part of the professionals, the organizations, to feature the power of community and also put their resources, their knowledge, their wisdom, and their practice in service of community. So you see the hydraulic pump is going in the opposite direction. Often we have the institutions get bigger, 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 and our kind of communities, our citizens moving into retreat. Well, what I'm showing you here is there is another way. And this isn't about getting volunteers to do what paid people should do. This isn't about gaslighting communities. It's really about recognizing that communities are centrally important. It takes both the community and the institution in right relationship for good outcomes to occur. One of the things I want to do in my short time in terms of presenting to you is I want to share with you, as I say, a little bit of a report from the field in terms of some of the practices that we are really seeing recur over and over again in places where communities feel really powerful and really creative, but also really well supported by institutions. So what I'm going to do, and I'll break the presentation up in two, as I've said, is for the rest of this presentation, I'm just going to take you through the first 4 of 8 touchstones. So these are practices that I think are really powerful when it comes to building caring communities, where everybody's gift is included. A couple of basic principles to lead me into this. Well, the first is that a lot of our work when we go into communities is about making visible what isn't always valued or visible. So it's sad to say this, but in a lot of cases, many of our health creating assets are local, but they're not necessarily seen or valued. So part of our work as professionals and as citizens is to make the invisible visible, to recognize the half full part of the glass. And that's a challenge because so much of what we do in healthcare professions is we measure the half empty part of the glass. And we do that by doing a needs assessment. Well, here today, I'd like to suggest to you, the only thing that needs analysis is needs analysis. What really needs attention is the health creating capacities of our community. Yes, by all manner of means, we should supplement those. And that's what we're seeing in our work all over the United Kingdom, all over Australia, and all over so many other countries, including Canada. What we're seeing is that when you flip the narrative and you start with a focus on the health creating capacities of local places, and then you use institutional capacities to supplement, you get better outcomes. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing in these 8 touchstones. So let me share with you briefly a few thoughts on the first 4, and then we can have a conversation. The very first touchstone helps us to think about this idea that community building in our neighborhoods, in our villages, in our towns is not a step-by-step process. It's a process that's messy and it requires playfulness. And it really is about searching and being iterative. So an awful lot of what we talk about when we talk about building community is a bit like parenting. I have twins. I've just had supper with them before I came out because I'm in a different time zone to you. And I'm absolutely convinced of the idea that it's not an exact science, but nor is it simple. It's a very complex process. And in the same way as parenting is complex of twins or any child, so too is working with communities. Really building communities from the inside out it's iterative, it's emergent. You cannot govern it from the top down. But one of the things that we can do, I need to be mindful of time here. Just let me say a few more things. We'll stop. One of the things that we can do is we can begin to recognize that in every community that there are connectors. And in many of the stories that Helen was sharing and featuring, I think she was featuring connectors. And I say this as, I suppose, distinct from leaders in the classic sense. Connectors are often people who are in the middle of the room, or maybe completely behind the scenes. They're gentle but vibrant people who are really good at bringing people into relationship with each other. I want to say that in the work that we are seeing around the world, as well as seeing the value of connectors at local level, we're really seeing the value of work that we heard described by Helen earlier. The value of outside professionals coming in, not as providers just, but as precipitators or animators of community life. Imagine what it would be like if every professional said to you, first and foremost, I believe that you're a health creator, and I want to first understand what matters to you and what you'd like to contribute to the well-being of your community. Then you can tell me how I can be useful and supplement that. That would absolutely and utterly change the social contract that we have at the moment. At the moment, we don't have that conversation. The conversation is, What's your sickness? What's your pathology? What's the deficit? Where's the problem? And how can I stuff my solution into that problem to fix you? It's a one up, one down relationship. An animator relationship says, I believe in you. I am not going to lift you up by putting you down. I'm going to lift you up by seeing you in the totality of who you are. But not alone does it say, I believe in you, I also am prepared to put resource and funding and facilitation into lifting you up and supporting you get connected with your community. Briefly, as we come to our first small group conversation, I want to talk a little bit about what a facilitator and a connector in a neighborhood could do, which would be really helpful. And I think what they can do is they can change the nature of the conversation. To shift the conversation from ain't it awful and what's broken and what's missing and how do we advocate for more funding to fill the half empty part of the glass. To have a conversation about, let's talk about what we do to be well. Let's talk about what we do to be healthful. Let's talk about the political and social determinants of health. Let's talk about caregivers and how we can ensure that they live with dignity. Let's talk about wealth distribution so people don't have to suffer economically or suffer racially because they're trying to culturally honor their heritage and they're trying to care for their loved ones. Let's talk about those issues. And those issues don't start in Parliament buildings, ironically. They've got to start at our kitchen tables and work outwards. Sometimes they will come out as a great lament. Sometimes they will come out as anger. And sometimes they'll come out as a resolute call to action, a movement towards a preferred future. What we also know is that as well as that conversation being a conversation that includes the gifts of the voice of individuals, it also includes a secret ingredient that we have in our communities called associations. This is the engine room of people-powered change. And if we could begin to understand that one of the fundamental measures of a healthy community is the extent to which it has a vibrant associational life, that is foundational. I don't care how much money you have or how good a service you have. If you're trying to create population health without investing in associational life, you are pouring water into desert sand. I'll stop there. So that's the first input. I hope you found that useful, maybe a little bit provocative, and hopefully a bit affirming as well of what you're doing. What we'd like to do next is we'd like to invite you for a short 12 minutes or so to be in small conversation groups where you simply entertain an open question. And the question is, what struck you about what you've heard me say? And not just me, you've also heard other sharings, but what has struck you so far from what you've heard? So a nice open question to get us started. You'll be shortly put into a Zoom breakout room, they're called. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you'll get a link and it'll bring you straight in. So why don't we open the rooms now and we'll call you back in about 12 minutes. Have fun. We'll put the question into the Zoom breakout as well so you know what it is. See you shortly. Welcome back, everybody. It's quite something to see 100 people just appearing before you. It's like, I know some of you will remember the Brady Bunch. Do you remember the Brady Bunch?
Yes.
It's kind of like, we're the Brady Bunch now. So good to be back together. Good to be back together. Now, with over or nearly 100 people in the room, it's hard to include all voices, but we do have the privilege of having the option of chat. So please do, if you have thoughts and you want to share them, please do share them in the chat as well. But I always feel less lonely when I hear voices. So it would be lovely to hear from 3 or 4 people, particularly what resonated for you in the conversation. So sometimes it's interesting as we talk in small groups, in groups of 3, we hear ourselves say things that we hadn't really realized we were going to say. But we also hear things from other people that help us get a perspective or maybe open up a viewpoint that might not have been so easy to get access to any other way. So is there anything that sort of really struck you from that conversation, that small group conversation, that you think it would be really helpful to share that with the wider group here? If so, I'd love to welcome your voice into the space. Who would like to share?
And I think folks at this point have the
Tracy.
ability to, oh, there we go.
They do. No, Tracy.
Great.
Tracy, can I just thank you for, this is a very generous act stepping forward like that. But one of the reasons that I held the silence was to make a point, and that is that often we don't wait long enough for community to actually have a voice. We rush in to fill the silence. So I think actually that point is probably the most useful thing I'll do all day here. So Tracy, thank you so much. That's a generous act. Love to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and summarize based on my group, and just for everyone, I'm Tracy Wasik. I'm Chief Program Officer with the Strategic Clinical Networks here in Alberta, and I've been a sponsor of this grant work for many years, and excited about the work that's been done. One of the question you asked us is, you know, what did you find that was most compelling about what you heard? And what we talked a little bit about was the complete, you know, disconnect between our institutional side of health delivery and the community mobilization side, and how we in the health side think about our cost centers and our capabilities, and don't really know how to go out and connect with community in a meaningful way. And even when we have, because of the grant, what I was, the illustration in my head was, you had all those stepping stones that were in a linear fashion about like, this is just easy, you just step from piece to piece to piece. But in fact, the connector resource is really critical to actually line up all those stones. They're not lined up right now, and so the connections, I think the work that Sharon and Helen and the team have done is mobilized and started the conversation with community to try and help make some organization so that the community knows how to connect with each other. And then more importantly, we're kind of looking at it, well, how do we connect with community? Because it's not intuitive. And we were giggling a little bit about the fact that we had some resources mobilized during COVID, and then we lost them all. And there was no ability to have a conversation on either side about how to retain those resources in the community that were really value add. So the starting point for us is really understanding both sides of that. You know, you had the push-pull, really. That's the right. Connectors being in the middle to make sense of those two sides was an aha, not an aha, but it was a really critical first step. Thank you.
That's great insight, Tracy, and thank you to your group as well. So that piece around minding the gap between the best intentions of the institution and the voice and the power of community. Yeah, it's really powerful. Thank you. Let's hear from one or two others. Again, you've got, I think you can raise your on-land hand. I can see you, or if you want be fancy, you can go to the reaction button and raise your digital hand like that. I think Lorraine has her hand up. Yep, Lorraine.
Hi.
Hi there.
I've worked for over 40 years in community health, and there's a time when we had community-wide projects engaging entire communities on multiple strategies for cardiovascular risk reduction and others. And I just was reminded of the success of those and the value of those when you were speaking. I don't think I ever forgot, but it was really great to hear some of that, what we did know then, showing up again. It's exciting to think that, you know, that kind of work might actually be possible in the current climate. And the other thing, I don't think my colleague will mind me sharing, because we work together, and one of the things that she said that I'll share with you on her behalf is that the balance between community participation and the institutional requirements, we kind of forget that they should probably be more balanced. Because we do look to the structures of where the money is with government, et cetera, and maybe, recognizing that even if we had more of that, that may not be what actually is needed. And the funding could still go to community animation and community engagement work for sure. But recognizing that we've tended to go towards institutions and what they should do. So there you go.
That's great. That's great. And I think there's a couple of things to just to honor in what you've said, Lorraine, and your colleague as well. As in around about 1984, when Madonna was singing "I'm a Material Girl in a Material World," we were pulling practitioners out of local place-based work, social workers, health workers, you name it. And we moved them into specialisms and into teams that where the allegiance was to fellow specialists or to a certain specialized way of working, to your fraternity, to your specialism, and away from my allegiances to the local place, my allegiances to this community. And I think we did something really profoundly, unintentionally, but profoundly harmful to the ecosystem when we did that. And we see that particularly in policing. But I think it's true in mental health. I think it's true right across the board. So it's almost, it does feel like, going back to the future. There's a DeLorean car in the story somewhere. But that sense of going back to the place that we were and knowing it for the first time and really understanding why it has value. And that idea of making sure that our vocationally based practitioners have an allegiance to the place and that we see the place as an organism of health and not just the individual. See, I think the difficulty is that we didn't just pull the experts out of place. We turned everybody into an individual unit consumer. And then we focused on their sickness. And, that's what we have to really try to flip, I think. And it's exciting to hear that you're keen to do that. And we have institutional memory that we've done it before. So that's really great. Let's hear from one other person and then I'll share a few more thoughts. Stacey.
Hi, I'm fairly new.
Hi, Stacey.
I'm fairly new to primary health. I've worked always within a large institution, usually in the ICUs and stuff. I'm fairly new, but I just wanted to share. So I'm cautious about this, but we have a young university student who's got this idea to do some community engagement and wanting to take it forward, kind of a little bit of a carnival idea, kind of to break down some of the barriers that we have in our community between the healthcare providers maybe and just what we provide. And but we really wanted to seek to make it fun. So just early days on talking about this, but we'd look to do it this summer, kind of leveraging like a carnival that we have here in Edmonton. Our location is great. We're at Thornton Park. And we'd probably target children and something really simple and playful to reach out to the community, but then in the background still have our social worker support, mental health support, like availability of extending those conversations a little bit more, putting on more of a friendly face and a community spirit to the community around us that has a lot of vulnerable populations in it. But, it's interesting listening to you speak today, as is that even when we're talking about that, I feel like I have a lot of caution around doing that, institutionally, like I have to make sure I do everything right. And we haven't even really talked to our leadership yet, but, just to make sure we do it right, very cautious even in that approach. We don't want to make any missteps. So we're very excited about doing this, but also, I feel a little bit nervous doing it too. So it's just a little piece of the community outreach we'd like to try.
I have to say, I really appreciate the way you shared that, Stacey, and you're modeling for us vulnerability as well. So one of the things I think is very powerful about what you've just done there is you've shown great authority and courage and strength in uncertainty. And actually, I think that's precisely the posture we should be adopting. We should be nervous. We should be aware that we can do harm. And actually, it's interesting, isn't it, to think about this? So your caution, your hesitancy is also thoughtfulness and intention. And I think what you're saying is, I recognize that I could engage in medical overreach here. And I could solve problems that don't belong to me in order to get something that the institution tells me I should be getting. This is mainly what community engagement is about, by the way. We have an idea of what will make the community we're trying to engage with healthy. And so we try to set up ways that we can get them to engage and consume what it is that we think they should be consuming, right? So your caution is about motivation. The other question I think that's really interesting here is, imagine the community themselves said that they were going to put on a carnival with no intention to engage with you at all and with no health intention. Imagine how health creating that act would be. So there's something about, and I put an article in earlier on around this, there's something about thinking about an approach that is going beyond community engagement, to going back to what if we started enabling communities to build connections and vibrancy on their own terms for no objective other than those connections. And then as they get stronger, enable them to figure out what it is they want to do together. And I think that's where, Stacey, I'm hearing your hesitancy as a very healthy, thoughtful inquiry. It sounds great, doesn't it, initially, to say, let's set up a carnival, let's get people coming, we'll put up stalls, we'll tell them what to eat and what not to do, and da 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 da. But, I was speaking to somebody recently, and they were saying, well, we're going to go into schools and we're going to ask kids, what they do to be healthy, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I know the school they're going to, and the answer will be, I carry a knife and I join a gang. And if you were 14 and you lived here and you wanted to survive, you'd do the same thing too if you paid any attention. And suddenly the public health person was kind of going, oh my God, I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that kind of work. But it's a really interesting question. What would I know if I was 14 and I was able to survive in this neighborhood? And the answer might be very, very different than eat 5 a day. So I think your caution is wise. But then it leaves the question, and that's some of what I want to pick up next. Well, what can we do? And I think one of the things that we can do is kind of the pivot away from delivery of health to the discovery of local capacities and associational capacities. Now, that doesn't mean that the delivery of health doesn't come. But the challenge is we can't really know what communities need until we know what communities have. And here's the real kicker. We can't engage with communities before communities are built. So many of you are working with, we use the term community, don't we? But actually, when we go into many places where people live, there's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of atomization and disconnection. So there's probably, a really good pushback to what I said earlier, which is, well, that's all well and good in Ireland of the 1950s, Cormac, but, have you been in my neighborhood recently? And actually, I have been extensively around Canada, but no, I don't know your neighborhood like you do. And I'm not trying to suggest that I do or that I ever will. But one of the things that's really critical, and this is where I want to go next, is that as we think about community, it's something that won't just happen. So, in thinking about building community, we talked about the first number of steps, 4 touchstones, I call them. And they were broadly about trying to have a conversation that reweaves communities that have become quite disconnected. So in a sense, the idea of the connector and the animator is almost like a weaving motion where we're taking parts of the community that have become apart from each other, and we're finding ways of treating the neighborhood as a loom. A lot of people talk about population health, but you could actually, and this initiative that we're celebrating today in a way reminds us of this. Like, we started with 6 neighborhoods and said, let's lift up the stories, what they thought us about health creation. And so we're thinking about the neighborhood as the primary unit of health. That's the loom. We're thinking about things that people want to do with their lives, economically, culturally, playfully, salsa dancing, reading books, whatever. We're thinking about them. We're not thinking about medicine. And we're recognizing that if we can support people to connect in all kinds of spontaneous ways, that is health. That's the foundation of health. And to Lorraine's point, if we could actually begin to learn from initiatives like this, we would be asking provocative questions of our leadership. Like, why can't we go back to do what we used to do in the 70s and 80s, which we know worked? And here's proof again. Or is this just another pilot? Well, we'll hear from Helen about what next steps are before we finish. So that question will be answered. I don't want to steal her thunder. But let me go back to some slides again, if I may. And see if we can pick up some of the question about what else we might do to, rather than provide services, to precipitate grassroots health creation. I should say really briefly here, because I get in trouble if I don't, to say I recognize that as well as doing this on land, there's lots and lots of people who are weaving communities online. And what's really nice, though, is that we can begin to think about, I suppose, what we're doing online, beginning to come off the internet and into on-land experiences where we can smell each other's coffee, we can be knee to knee, we can connect, because that really matters. I mean, it really is the difference between dopamine and serotonin. So there's actually biochemical differences in that experience. And anybody who's ever dated online knows eventually you want to meet the person, although, there may be some people you don't want to meet. But the idea is that eventually it does become an in-person experience. So both are important. And that brings us back to this idea again that associations, clubs and groups and associational networks at that very, very local level are really important. So I think one of the things that perhaps it would be useful for civic leaders, but also for practitioners that are community facing to be curious about is, well, who are the associations? Do these associations know each other? What might I do to be a convener of those associations? Like, what would be the health creating consequences of an association of associations in a neighborhood, all talking to each other? I, over the last couple of days, have talked with the Irish League of Credit Unions. I was shocked to discover how many members they have and how much money they have. These guys are loaded, and they're all member-based organizations. So in Ireland alone, there are hundreds of thousands of members in every single parish throughout Ireland. There are many in Canada. I mean, again, the credit union movement and the cooperative movement is profoundly rich in across Canada. So my question to them is, how might you use your social and financial capital to think about life, and a good life, to the very end? So this isn't just a kind of a nice to have, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya as we kind of walk into the sunset. There's power in associational life. In the 1950s, for 115 days, people who were subjugated to all kinds of racial abuse decided not to use the bus company, the Montgomery Bus Company. And for 115 days, we had the boycott, where people used one of the most fundamental assets that they had available to them, their feet. And they chose not, against, huge sacrifice, right? To walk to work and walk back home again on top of a hugely complex set of life circumstances. But it brought that company to its knees in ways that all kinds of racial legislation, anti-racism just did not do. That's the power of people. My older boys are talking now about, the injustice of having to take student loans out. I say, guys, you got to get organized. The banks are not going to wake up one morning and go, you know what, let's do some good today for these poor students who are going to carry loans right into their mid to late years. No, they're not. So, there's power in associational life. One of the things that's really interesting about the work and what we're learning really at the Feed Citizens is just how powerful it is also to recognize, even in communities that don't have a natural plaza, where their built environment almost designs community out. And I know that many of you will understand when I talk about vertical communities, where really the only way you're going to bump into your neighbor is if you accidentally crash into their car as they're leaving, to go wherever they're going out of the neighborhood. So there are many neighborhoods that I think have been so poorly designed, and where so many of the bumping places and gathering spaces have been taken out of the community, the post office, often libraries and so forth, places where people could convene are gone. So part of our work in public health, particularly as people spend more time at home and in their neighborhoods, and as we know, there are seasons in life where we can find ourselves spending a lot more time in our neighborhoods and maybe not having the same level of upward mobility that we might have, or social mobility that we might have in other seasons of our lives. How do we create the conditions where people can connect in whatever way they feel comfortable? Here you see some examples of what we do when we try to build the conditions within which people can share, connect, and exchange. Here's a lady who lives in a vertical community. Her neighbors didn't know this, but she has actually figured out how to have a beehive in her apartment. Sounds a bit scary when you hear it initially, but it's actually perfectly safe. So she's sharing with her neighbors how to bring bees back to the neighborhood. I've written a paper about this, and my colleague John Massamy, who is our Nurture Development's representative in Canada, is on the call with me here today as well. John knows a lot about beekeeping and the importance of bringing bees, but we've been working on using it as a metaphor to explain our work. But, bees and bringing bees back to urban environments is hugely, hugely important. I don't have time to explain, but I'm sure many of you know what I mean by this. In this photograph here, we see a lady bending down, beautiful red hair. She's bending down and she's involved in putting her hand in the soil, and she's sowing some seeds. These are seeds that people have brought from all over the neighborhood, and they're doing a seed swap. These guys are quite comfortable to sit in front of their screen, but rather than be in their room on their own, we've invited them to come to the school hall. This is a Saturday morning in a local school, where the school, instead of being a fortress where we send our children to do a single purpose thing called education and then dispatch them, the school says, hey, we're an asset for this community. We should be open on Saturdays. We should be open at night. We shouldn't be closed 6 months of the year. And it's saying to the community, what are the things you'd like to share and gift each other? So you see lots of examples here. Later on in the day, they're still talking about swapping seeds. These gentlemen like fixing things. So, they're at a table with bottomless cups of tea and coffee as pay for their work. The point that I want to make as we come near the end of today's conversation is that I think those 5 touchstones that don't happen in a linear fashion, they're quite emergent and there's no right or wrong starting point. But I think their cumulative effect is that they build civic muscle. They take people who might be quite disconnected and not very sure that they have a lot of power to create health. And they give them a lived, embodied experience of what happens when they get organized, when they build community, and the impact that has on their quality of life, on their level of happiness, as distinct from pleasure, on their level of agency and autonomy and power. And I think that creates a foundation. It creates a foundation to have a conversation that's not a polarizing conversation. that's not about them and us, but is a conversation that says, hey, look what we've done. Look at all of the stories we've heard from all of our neighbors about the things they've done. Look at all of the things that we could do together if we got organized and connected. And I think that's the basic foundation upon which people can begin to build neighborhood health plans from the ground up, which answer the three questions that we have here. Because they've got stories about being powerful, about being productive, about being creative, and using their local assets, I think it's much easier for them to say, hey, what else could we do to create a preferred future and a healthy life? What does well-being really look like from our perspective? So that first question is, what can we alone, organizing in our neighborhoods, in our small bounded places, do? The second question is, what do we need outside help to do? Right? So I like to think about these as like 3 lanes of a swimming pool. In the first lane, our health and our care and our well-being is not something that we go to service land to buy, to purchase, or to consume. Yes, of course, services are part of the gig, they're part of the deal, but they're only a very small part. 80 to 85% of what determines our health has nothing got to do with medicine. And yet 88% of the money in Canada that's invested in health goes into the machinery of medicine and pharmacology. I'm not peddling a conspiracy theory here. This is fact. So we're getting the crumbs from the captain's table when it comes to community development, when it comes to wealth distribution. But what is it that we could do ourselves if we were cheered on, if the barriers were removed, if carers were supported and given the dignity and the respect that they deserve? If everybody could live well right to the very end. You know, people die twice, we know this, first socially and then clinically. We need to do more about the first. And that won't be about just services. It's going to be about community. And boy, are we playing catch up. Because in an individualized consumer society, we are shredding community. So we've got to really step up and show up, I think, and reclaim that commonwealth. Because if we don't, when we need it most, it'll be gone. So I sometimes say in the vernacular, get to know your neighbors before you need them, right? So what can we do together? COVID taught us that there's a lot we can do together. What's the positive alternative to COVID? If COVID precipitated the kind of responses we saw, well, what is the precipitant that Alberta Health and that other practitioners and other institutions could bring to the table? What is it we need to do to replace COVID positive, to really precipitate that first lane? The second lane is, what do we need outside help with? Because boy, of course we need outside help. We're not going to do it all on our own. This isn't about just getting volunteers to do things. It's much more complex, much more sophisticated. So in that second lane of the swimming pool, we want to see communities in the lead, leading their best lives, leading right to the very end of their life, a good life, and living in crescendo, not diminuendo, right? But we want to see professionals swimming behind them, in reserve, supporting, supplementing, cheering on, being there in a servant leadership role, on tap, not on top. And then the final question is, of course, we still need services and we still need things to be done for us. But boy, it would be nice if they were done in a respectful and democratic way, where our voices were taken into account. And I think this order is really important. Starting with the first question and moving right through to the third means that we can really respect the civic power of individuals and indeed their associations. So I want to stop there because I thought it would be interesting to use that framework to have a question. We don't have time, I don't think, to go into another breakout, but it would be really interesting to think about those 3 questions, that 3-lane swimming pool, and just see how you think it's going at the moment. My sense, as I reflect on the various countries that I've been in, and I travel to Singapore tomorrow, and it's certainly true there too, is I think we spent a lot of time in the third lane, asking communities what we can do for them or to them, okay? Sometimes we don't even ask, we just do it. Okay. And I think increasingly we're moving into the second lane. But I think where there's a real set of possibilities yet to be explored is what might we do if we became the precipitants in the first lane, right? Not the people who know it all, not the sage on the stage, but really relocating authority. And maybe sometimes that's about giving money away. Sometimes that's about stepping back and not taking the lead, and about relocating the authority and say, you know, there's community alternatives here. And we're going to launder money out of our system and out of our acute care end of things. And we're going to repatriate it into and upstream into community ways. So I'm going to remove the spotlight from me because I want us all to be in conversation together. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Just what's firing up for you? What's triggering for you? What's on your heart? Marlon.
I want to thank you, Cormac. I wonder how many people on this call have come through and maybe still are the traditional healthcare service environment. I'm retired, but I did that too. And I am struck with this conversation, how much relearning we need to do to change the way we've thought, the way we know how to do things in the third lane, to what will it take to go forward in a different way. And that's the invitation I think we need for collective learning, the humbleness, and we'll probably screw up a few times, but we'll get better as we do it. But I'm really struck by, we've come from a past. How do we move to a future with how we think and therefore how we work?
That's a beautiful call to action. Thank you, Marlon. Donna, good to see you.
Hi, Cormac.
How are you?
Oh, fine, thank you. I am always so fascinated when you speak, and I've lots of thoughts, but one that bubbled up right to the top is I keep asking myself, how can we make healthcare providers more? How can we turn them into natural care? How can we turn providers into hyperlocal members of the community? And I say this, you know, as the mother of a young man who has 24-hour one-to-one nursing care. And how can people who need that, how can they not have to choose between community and service provision? How can we make our providers more known to us, more natural, and more hyperlocal?
That's a great question. And you know, my impulse is immediately to say that question is a really powerful convening question. And that because we're recording this, I would be strongly encouraging that whatever's coming out of this conversation now isn't seen as a Q&A, but is seen as a clarion call to a new set of conversations. So what Marlene just said, what Donna have just said, this is your community members calling you into a new set of conversations. And the only thing I know for certain, Donna, is that whatever the answers will be, whatever the conversations could be, it's going to be surprising because we don't yet have the neural pathways. We haven't grown the neural pathways to know the answer. So this isn't about it's right or it's wrong, but this is about growing a whole new set of trees in the forest, or regrowing to take account of earlier points. It's very exciting. So thank you. And I'd love to be part of that conversation in the future as well, so I could learn from your experiences. Sandy.
I say in many different ways that sometimes I feel like we need to go back to like Little House on the Prairie days. And I think about where people took care of people. Neighbors took care of neighbors. And when there was a sick parent or a sick child or something was happening, that the community kind of came together and they helped take care of people's crops and help take care of the kids. And I know for myself, I have a child with special needs, additional needs, and all of the people who I thought were my network of people aren't there. And I am now left to have to pay for services because I feel like there's no community left to say, hey, here's a helping hand. Hey, can I help you do this? People are a lot busier now than they used to be. I believe. I think there's a lot of things that definitely play into where we are now. But I do believe that, like we need to sometimes stop and get out of our own selves and think, could my neighbor use a warm meal today? Like, do I know that they're struggling? Or rather than having them, oh, here's the information for Meals on Wheels, pay $10 for a meal, like, can I cook something and drop it off? And can we be our own community connection and support rather than relying on those paid services in our community?
So Sandy, I will pick up on this because I'm so appreciative of you sharing your own personal life experience like Dana did as well. And one of the things that I think would be really interesting in future conversations is to think about, rather than looking back and trying to reclaim the past, which clearly, we've got to foreclose on the idea that we're going to do in that. We've got to try to understand what are the ties that bind us today. What are they and how do we move forward? And I think we can look at promising practice. Doesn't put everything on the shoulders of local people and on, folks that already have a lot on their plate in terms of caring. And so one of the things that I am really hopeful about is practices like the practice of the Starfire Center in Cincinnati, where they have reimagined how they think about supporting people with, various labels, in this case, intellectual disability. And instead of seeing them for their label, what they've begun to recognize is that when you lift the label off, there's a whole range of gifts that the neighborhoods that they have been put in a bus and sent to this workshop placement, require are just there waiting to be connected. And one of the things that really gives me such joy is when I see an organization like that have the courage. I say it's a parent-run organization, started 40 years ago, and the classic trajectory of over time, they employed people, to do the work, and the managers started to become the key people that did the work, and the parents lost a lot of influence and power. You know the way the story goes. But what they've begun, and it's taken huge courage to do, is they've begun to say, hey, if we saw the people that we serve as gifts and as community builders in their own right, and we supported them to be community builders in their neighborhoods. So instead of taking them out and trying to fix them, we actually saw them for their gifts, and we supported them to actually do the work of building community, do the things that they want to do, that they say would make a good life or a good day. I'd love to see that happen more and more and more. We've written so many people off in society and put them down. And I think if we could flip the narrative from what's wrong to what's strong, and then actually hold our institutions to account, I think we could reimagine hospice care. We could reimagine the disability care. We could reimagine elder care. And instead of siloing people by age or by label, we could recognize that they have gifts that we cannot possibly live without. The challenge really is the people who've been defined as the problem need to get the power to redefine the problem, because I honestly think I'd have a lot more confidence in them in terms of moving forward. So there's a power conversation to be had here, but it feels like we're talking ourselves into another conversation here, Helen. So mindful that I'm going to have to hand over to you, and I know that I didn't get a chance to hear from everybody today, but let's say that we will meet again soon, that this is not the end, but it's simply and until next time. Can I say a huge thank you as I hand over to Helen? And I have been honored to be a guest and a conversation partner with you today. So thank you for opening up space. Helen, over to you to close us out.
Great. Thanks so much, Cormac. It's a wonderful conversation, and we will continue it for sure moving forward. So what we wanted to do is just to share a bit around what we were going to be doing in the next 3 years. So starting next Monday, Health Canada will be supporting this work for another 3 years of activities to build on the learnings that we've had already. Our focus will continue to be on rural communities with spread activities to support additional communities to advance their efforts to support those affected by dementia, scaling to supporting other underserved individuals living in rural communities, and then sustaining the work with the 5 communities who've already participated and gain a more in-depth understanding of the type of support that's needed to sustain the work over the course of time. So now I'd like to pass this off to Mikey Mork, our Executive Director, to say a few thank yous on our behalf.
Sorry, thank you very much, Helen. And thank you so much, Cormac, for your inspiring words and your leadership in conversation today. We really are so grateful to have had the opportunity for you to join and share with us today. And we hope that this is the beginning of a lasting friendship. We will aspire to continue focusing on what is strong, not what is wrong, to support the well-being of our communities and people in Alberta in a meaningful way. We're really pleased that so many people joined today from multiple global locations and organizations. And I think it really is a sign of how important this community-focused activity is to so many. And we hope that you made some new connections and some new friends today. Thank you to our funder, Health Canada, to Alberta Health Services for your generous in-kind support and leadership, and to our government partner, Alberta Health. None of this work would have been possible without our 5 participating rural communities and, of course, the Health Canada grant team. I thank you for your passion, courage, creativity, and commitment to focus on well-being. And we encourage you to continue to create your stories and share them with others. We look forward to partnering with all of you in the future and look forward to what is next. And once again, Cormac, thank you for sharing your insights and your energy with us today. Thanks to everyone for your enthusiastic participation. Thank you for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.